Hello and welcome to day 3 of our MC13 updates with our special correspondent, Jan Walter. Hi, Jan.
Hi, John. It's very good to be here. Thank you.
Very lovely to have you again. So yesterday, Jan, we left off with you saying that there was a lot of anticipation around the arrival of the Indian Commerce Minister. Can you tell us what is the pulse on that?
You're right. There was and still is a lot of anticipation. I've heard one delegate saying that while at the last ministerial, everybody was anticipating that particular minister to leave, now it was the other way around. Now it was, everybody was anticipating for that particular minister to come in. My understanding is that he might be leaving on Friday, but I'll get to some rumors that the ministerial might get extended. So look, the anticipations are there. So we had some discussions in the morning on the outcome document, the larger ministerial declaration. There was a discussion on agriculture this morning. There was a discussion on e-commerce this morning. And obviously, India plays a role in all of these. There have been a number of closed door meetings with both bilateral as well as in small groups of delegations, including ministerial. To be very honest with you, I think the mood is improving. The motto of this ministerial, I think, is becoming cautious optimism. So that's where we are. Now, what is interesting is that while the Indian minister arrived late yesterday and you joined in today, the Chinese trade minister left. So they didn't have a chance to kind of interact, which it doesn't mean that the two countries could not meet. There are other officials. But it is interesting, and I wanted to stress one point there. This ministerial is one of the first ones, or maybe the first one, where India and China do not see eye to eye on many issues. So you have investment facilitation for development, where China wants it embedded in the WTO architecture, India doesn't. You have e-commerce. China, ahead of the ministerial, co-sponsored a proposal to extend the moratorium. India is strongly against. On fish, there are definitely differences within those two countries. So it's interesting that they wouldn't meet here and at the same time have different views.
And in terms of implications, because you say that they have different standpoints on a lot of the issues which are up for negotiations, what would you say that means for the outcomes?
I'm a lifetime optimist, and you know that yourself. So I take it from the positive side, right? India has usually positioning itself as the leader of developing countries, an advocate for developing countries. And with China now having different views, with the Africa, Pacific, and Caribbean group, which is a number of developing countries, they also stand on different sides of the aisle from India on e-commerce, for example. So there is this argument that India is, doing what it is doing and advocating what it is advocating on behalf of kind of developing world or global south, if you will. That argument is crumbling. So in that sense, there is a bigger possibility of genuine engagement on substance and actually having substantive results.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. What about climate change? Is that a big agenda, and in what ways are the WTO members engaging with it?
You rightly asked on that specifically because I mentioned fish, I mentioned this and that. It all somehow relates to climate change. So thanks for kind of pushing me into being a little bit more specific and structured. There is a lot of focus on climate change, or rather how trade can help mitigate climate change. So there is an interaction. Now, I would see trade and environment, or trade and climate change, in two buckets. One is how can trade incentivize, green transition, if you will. And this is, this can be seen through subsidies, this can be seen through various restrictions and other incentives, financial or otherwise, which then need to be tested against WTO rules. And the WTO rules need to be adapted if necessary in order to see whether it's actually helping and it's not trade distorting, or whether it is hidden protectionism, if you will. So that's one kind of incentive via trade or incentives through trade for green transition. And the other one is innovation and its dissemination in green technologies, right? And it has a lot to do with intellectual property. It has a lot to do with technology transfer. And that's another bucket, which obviously involves a cross-border movement, not necessarily of goods or services, but definitely a cross-border movement of knowledge and know-how on how things can be done and should be done. And in those two buckets, you basically have it all. So we've seen a declaration by ministers on fossil fuels subsidies reform about how to take that work forward. We've seen some work on plastics pollution and how trade works within and for and against plastics pollution, really. I should mention the ISD, a think tank, is running basically a parallel conference just across the road here, their Trade and Sustainability Hub. And that's fascinating because you have the mingling of ministers, delegates, and the civil society kind of bringing together. There was a lot of talk on circular customs. The World Economic Forum had one. There was a lot of talk on industrial policy, on deforestation. Aiken organized a panel on solar energy. So that's the ground from which some specific policies can grow. And obviously, I can't not mention fish, right? Like the biodiversity aspect of fishery subsidies. Again, it comes to the first bucket, how to incentivize and whether it's traders distorting or not. But that's a big part of the environmental piece.
I was actually going to ask you about climate change. Are there specific members who are looking at major players for certain signals as well?
It's interesting that you asked this, and you caught me a little bit off guard, because I would say that the key players are much more diverse than in other trade files or trade dossiers, right? And this is for very specific reasons. The big economies, obviously, they are interested. They are the key players on everything. But you would also have, for example, small island developing countries where their physical existence actually depends on whether there is climate change mitigation or not. You would have countries where both their economies and their population are stressed with natural disasters caused by climate change. So I would say there is no member in the WTO, no country, and no stakeholder who would not care or who would not have certain views on this file and wouldn't be really pushing them. So it's really diverse. On the stakeholder side, you can be looking at it from a lens or through a lens of a fisherman who gets subsidies for their fuel into their vessel. And you can also see it from an industry, solar industry. You can also see it from consumer association. So there is really everybody is involved.
So it's a diverse sort of group, definitely. Just to wrap up, Jan, what are the other highlights that people definitely need to know about?
I talked a lot, but if anybody is on board to their death by now, again, invitation to reach out to me. So look, highlights from today, I would say the International Chamber of Commerce and WTO Business Forum. That was the moment of this ministerial to have an industry view or civil society view, let's say. And it was interesting. I think two key points to bring in from there was e-commerce and the dispute settlement reform. So on the e-commerce side, we're really talking, benefits to poor countries, benefits to SMEs, that it really spans across. And they were fleshing out this political disconnect from the real world economy, which is happening, in basically 2 or 3 countries, 2 or 3 members. I know I talked a lot, but if anybody is on board to their death by now, again, invitation to reach out to me. So look, highlights from today, I would say the International Chamber of Commerce and WTO Business Forum. That was the moment of this ministerial to have an industry view or civil society view, let's say. And it was interesting. I think two key points to bring in from there was e-commerce and the dispute settlement reform. So on the e-commerce side, we're really talking, benefits to poor countries, benefits to SMEs, that it really spans across. And they were fleshing out this political disconnect from the real world economy, which is happening, in basically 2 or 3 countries, 2 or 3 members. I know I talked a lot, but if anybody is on board to their death by now, again, invitation to reach out to me. And then on the DS reform, the dispute settlement reform, it's really about, is this organization going to be relevant going? When it comes to highlights, I think today we've seen the first, I wouldn't say formal, but definitely informal suggestions that this minister will not end tomorrow. It might get extended. Both the Director General and the Chair have mentioned that, until there is success, we will not let you go. So it's starting to be there. Main expectation for tomorrow, look, it will all come together. The big pot, the hot pot will be brewed, and let's see if there is a soup at the end of the day, or we need to cook it a little bit more for it to be digestible for everybody and go over to Friday.
That's a brilliant analogy. thinking about the consensus that has to happen there. And on that note, Jan, we're going to stop here and we look forward to hearing from you tomorrow. So thank you very much, Jan, for today.
Thank you, Joanne. And as always, I will be looking forward to tomorrow.